We didn't know a lot of kids like at our age. We were more secluded. We never really left the ranch that often.
Paris. Jackson, the only daughter of Michael Jackson, finally broke her silence after years of staying quiet about the rumors surrounding her life. For years, she chose healing over headlines, focusing on her personal journey rather than addressing the speculation that followed her since childhood. Recently, at 27, she made a shocking revelation that confirmed what many had suspected, leaving the world buzzing with the news. What exactly did Paris Jackson admit? Throughout this video, we'll explore the details of her confession, the circumstances that led to this moment, and how this truth has shaped her identity over the years. Recently, attention turned once again to the daughter of the King of Pop, Paris Jackson, as she shared a series of revelations that many people felt only confirmed what had long been suspected about her private life and her complicated relationship with her father. Observers said it felt like a reminder that behind the fame, fortune, and family name was a young woman still wrestling with identity, truth, and heartbreak. They wondered, wasn't it striking how every time Paris spoke up, the world seemed to lean in just a little closer, eager to hear her side of the story? Her words, though simple, carried the kind of weight that comes when someone has lived under the constant shadow of a larger-than-life parent. One of the most emotional moments came when Paris was spotted in Malibu, walking alone and visibly upset. Witnesses described her as tearful, and for many, the first thought was that her emotions must be connected to her late father. After all, how could they not be? But Paris quickly clarified that these were not tears about Michael Jackson, but rather what she called breakup tears. She had just ended her engagement to Justin Long, and she reportedly confessed that she had truly believed their relationship would last forever. She was quoted saying, "I thought this would last forever." But sometimes, love has other plans. It was a vulnerable confession, the kind that reminded people that no matter her famous last name, she was still a young woman navigating the same heartbreaks that so many others have faced. And really, who hasn't thought love was permanent, only to realize it sometimes fades when you least expect it? Yet Paris's revelations did not stop at her personal life. She took it a step further and said something that had everyone second-guessing what they thought they knew. So stay with me, because as you'll see, the truth she let slip at 27 years old. Come along. Did you know that Paris Jackson took significant steps concerning her father's estate? She reportedly filed a formal objection with the court, challenging expenses made back in 2018 that she believed were questionable. According to her, certain payments were neither properly recorded nor explained. And even more startling were her claims that some of the money had been diverted for reasons never made clear to the public. This raised questions that many had quietly asked for years. Who truly controls Michael Jackson's vast estate, and where exactly does the money go? Paris seemed determined not only to seek answers for herself, but also to speak out against what she felt was unfair or hidden. Wasn't it bold, some wondered, for her to confront the very system managing the legacy of her father? Her willingness to confront such issues connected back to the way she has always spoken about her own identity. Paris has been open about how complex her self-discovery has been, and she often pointed to her father's influence in shaping how she saw herself. She has said that Michael repeatedly told her, "You're black. Be proud of your roots," and for that reason, she confidently declared, "I consider myself black." For some, this declaration sparked debate, but for Paris, it was a direct reflection of the values her father instilled in her. Her journey of self-discovery also included coming out as bisexual when she was just 14, though she admitted that in her family's religious environment, the topic of homosexuality was still seen as taboo. It was as if Paris was always walking a fine line, on one side honoring the teachings and legacy of her family, and on the other, carving out her own truth in a world that constantly judged her. How difficult must it be, people asked, to carry both the weight of your father's legacy and the burden of your own search for identity? Most recently, Paris stirred even more conversation by sharing her unfiltered thoughts about the planned Michael Jackson biopic. She criticized the film as a fantasy land that catered to what she described as a very particular section of her father's fan base. Her remarks reportedly alarmed some family members who worried that her honesty could impact the commercial success of the project. Still, Paris seemed more concerned with authenticity than with protecting anyone's financial interests. To her, it was important that people understood her father not as a flawless myth, but as a complicated human being. Isn't that what many children of icons quietly wish? That the world would allow their loved one to be remembered not as a fantasy, but as a full person, flaws and all? Through all of these revelations, her heartbreak, her challenges to the estate, her claims about her identity, and her candid words about the biopic, Paris Jackson continued to show the world that she was not afraid to speak her truth. To really understand the Paris we see today, you have to go back, way back, to the start of her story. And trust me, this next chapter is one you don't want to miss, because it sets the stage for everything that came after. So keep your eyes on this, and stay with me, right till the very end, because only then will the full picture make sense. A childhood in the spotlight. Growing up as Michael Jackson's daughter meant Paris Jackson lived a childhood that very few could ever truly imagine, let alone understand. She had been born into a world where everything around her felt larger than life. And yet, at the same time, her father tried to make sure that she and her brothers stayed grounded. People often wondered what it must have been like to be raised by the king of pop. Was it a life of endless spoiling, a golden childhood filled with gifts and luxuries beyond measure? Paris would later explain that it was far more layered than that. She remembered how her early years had been shaped not only by privilege, but also by her father's careful and very intentional parenting. There had been joy, of course, but there had also been structure, discipline, and a deep sense of responsibility. How many children, after all, could say they lived at Neverland Ranch, a place that seemed straight out of a dream, and still be reminded every single day that magic had to be earned? For the first 7 years of her life, Paris called Neverland Ranch home, a place unlike any other in the world. Sitting on 2,700 acres of California land, it held everything a child could imagine: its own amusement park, a zoo, even a cinema. Outsiders often assumed that those wonders existed simply for the Jackson children, as if Paris and her brothers could just run out and ride a carousel or pet exotic animals whenever they pleased. But Paris explained that things were not at all the way people thought. She remembered her father telling them that the rides, the zoo, and the fun had been built for children who were sick or struggling, kids who could never afford a day at Disneyland. And so, the Jackson children knew they couldn't just play whenever they liked. If they wanted to enjoy those things, they had to finish their homework first, or show good behavior. How surprising was it, really, that the man everyone thought of as eccentric actually cared so deeply about teaching discipline and gratitude to his own children? Michael Jackson's parenting style often startled those who only saw him as a global superstar. Paris would later recall how firm he had been with them. Yes, they had grown up privileged, but their father made sure that nothing came without effort. She explained how getting a new toy wasn't as simple as asking for one. Instead, they had to earn it by reading. If she wanted 5 toys, she needed to read 5 books first. It was a simple rule, but it spoke volumes about the way Michael thought. He didn't want them to grow up spoiled. He wanted them to grow up curious, thoughtful, and hardworking. Beyond material things, Michael made sure his children were exposed to the wider world. While most people thought of the Jacksons traveling only in private jets and staying in luxury hotels, Paris remembered how her father took them to see poverty-stricken areas too. He wanted them to know both sides of life, the glamour and the struggle. "We saw third world countries. We saw every part of the spectrum," Paris once said, a memory that stayed with her even years later. And isn't it striking that a man often criticized for being out of touch with reality actually worked so hard to show his children what reality really looked like? Music, of course, was another part of their upbringing, and Michael didn't leave that to chance. Paris remembered how her father introduced them to all kinds of sounds: classical pieces, jazz, hip-hop, R&B, Motown, rock. To him, it wasn't enough for his children to just listen to music. They had to understand it, to respect where it came from, to feel the cultures and stories behind each song. He wanted them to be cultured and educated, not just surrounded by wealth. And Paris, looking back, credited her father for shaping her work ethic and her wide taste in music. In her mind, it was clear her father had given her the foundation that would later help her stand on her own 2 feet in the world. But while Neverland had been magical in so many ways, there had also been darker shadows lurking behind the bright lights. Being Michael Jackson's child meant growing up under the unblinking eye of the media, and Paris would later admit just how heavy that pressure felt. She said that the paparazzi's constant obsession with her father left scars that showed up in her own life in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Even with all the challenges and the complexities, Paris's devotion to her father never wavered. She would later say, with a kind of fierce honesty, that ever since she had been born, her father had been the best parent she could have asked for. Her words carried the weight of someone who had seen both the privilege and the pain of being Michael Jackson's daughter. And it's this turning point, this chapter where everything shifted in ways no one could have imagined, that we're about to step into right now. So stay with me, because as the story unfolds, you'll see exactly why this day was unlike any other in her life, and why it changed not just Paris, but the way the world saw her father, too. The day everything changed. On June 25, 2009, Paris, Jackson's life changed in a way that no child could ever truly prepare for. She was only 11 years old when the news broke that her beloved father, Michael Jackson, had passed away. The world felt the shock, but for her, it wasn't just a headline or a trending topic. It was the loss of the man who had been her everything. People often wondered, how could someone so young even begin to make sense of such a sudden tragedy? Michael Jackson, a global icon, and her father had been preparing for his big comeback tour, This Is It, with shows planned at London's O2 Arena. He had even excitedly told his children about the adventure ahead, saying with enthusiasm that they were going to live in London for a year. But Paris, even as a child, noticed her father's exhaustion during rehearsals. She later recalled how drained he seemed, as though the weight of both his career and his life was pressing down on him. Then, in a heartbreaking twist, everything ended with the news that Michael Jackson had died of acute propofol intoxication administered by his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray. The announcement of his death spread across the globe almost instantly. Websites crashed, Twitter, the LA Times, even Wikipedia, all overwhelmed by the sheer number of people searching for answers. From Paris to Hong Kong, Sydney to Los Angeles, fans poured into the streets in disbelief. The world grieved the king of pop. But for Paris, the grief was that of a daughter who lost her father. The depth of her sorrow became clear to the public on July 7, 2009, at the memorial service held at the Staples Center. Millions tuned in. It became the most watched online streaming event in history, with over 21 million Americans watching. The service was filled with music, tributes, and star-studded moments. But it was Paris, the quiet 11-year-old who stunned everyone. In a moment that wasn't planned, she stepped forward to the microphone, her voice breaking with raw emotion, and said through tears that her father had been the best father anyone could imagine, adding that she loved him so much. Who could forget that scene, her collapsing into Janet Jackson's arms as the weight of her words struck everyone in the arena? The audience of over 21,000 people was visibly shaken, many choking back tears, and millions watching from their homes couldn't help but cry too. Later, her brother Prince would reflect that Paris had shown more strength in that moment than anyone else in the family. Wasn't it remarkable that a child who had just lost her father managed to speak words that would echo across the globe and touch the hearts of millions? But life after that day was never the same. After Michael's death, Paris and her brothers were placed under the guardianship of their grandmother, Catherine Jackson. Their daily lives transformed almost overnight. The children, who had once been homeschooled and traveled the world in the protective bubble their father had created, suddenly had to adjust to a more ordinary, structured lifestyle. As the years passed, the challenges became even more visible. By 2012, concern about Paris's well-being had grown so strong that a judge ordered an investigation into her safety after she attempted to take her own life. That moment was a devastating reminder of just how heavy the burden of grief, pressure, and scrutiny had become for her. The rumors that wouldn't die. Throughout the years that followed Michael Jackson's death, Paris Jackson found herself at the center of endless rumors, and one question seemed to echo louder than any other. Who was her real biological father? It was the kind of speculation that refused to fade, the type that tabloids fed on, and strangers whispered about, even though it touched on something deeply personal. People often asked, almost as if it was their business to know, could Michael really be the father of his children? Or was there someone else in the picture? The truth was, these whispers had started long before Michael passed away. But his death only seemed to pour fuel on the fire. Media outlets seemed to make it their duty to dissect the children's looks, comparing Paris's fair skin, her bright blue eyes, and her features against Michael's, as though appearance alone could decide a child's parentage. Some tabloids went so far as to push forward names like Mark Lester, Michael's longtime friend and a former child star, suggesting he might be the real father. For years, Lester neither firmly denied nor fully confirmed the claims, which only left more room for speculation to grow. And isn't it strange how silence sometimes speaks louder than words, especially in the world of gossip? Paris, in the middle of all this noise, chose at first to remain quiet. People around her often said she carried herself with dignity, even when the media was tearing her apart with headlines that poked at her identity. But behind that public silence, she was said to be deeply affected. The pressure of constantly having her bloodline questioned wasn't just uncomfortable, it was damaging. Those close to her noticed the toll it took, describing how the constant doubt fed into her battles with anxiety and depression. Imagine being a teenager and waking up every morning knowing that strangers were debating whether you even belonged to your own family. How could anyone carry that kind of weight without breaking down at some point? By her mid-teens, the pressure boiled over into serious health struggles, so heavy that she needed professional help to begin picking up the pieces. Even as she tried to move forward, stepping into her own path as a model and a musician, the question of who is her real father never seemed to fully disappear. It lingered like a shadow, often brought up in interviews and articles that seemed to care more about sensational headlines than her music or her art. Over time, observers began to notice that no matter how loudly the rumors roared, Paris leaned on that sense of family support to carve out her own identity. She wasn't just Michael Jackson's daughter to herself. She was Paris, a woman determined to build her own legacy, even if that meant living under constant scrutiny. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the